G'day YouTubers. I've always had two sounders on board, but now one of them's different. So I'm out there sounding around trying to get a feel for the strengths and weaknesses of each of the sounders. Now one of them's got a 3D mode which the other doesn't, but the other one has what they call mega side imaging and mega down imaging, and basically what that means is it operates at a higher frequency. You can change the frequency to get lower frequencies. Lower frequencies go deeper in the water, but the higher frequencies give you more definitions. So I was really keen to see just how much improvement that gave, if any, and find out what the best ways to operate these pair of sounders were, like maybe have one on side imaging and the other on traditional and down imaging, or 3D, or whatever. Just work out the best way to find the fish. So anyway, that's what this video is about. There's some GPS marks in there as I move around. Hope you enjoy it. I'm back out at Harry's again, still trying to come to terms with my downrigger. I've swapped out the line for braid. Had stainless steel on, but that was just becoming a bird's nest every time it misbehaved. From what I've been reading, the braid will not do that, so it should work better. Whether we catch anything on it's another matter. I do have this little issue where I've got it set to run 4 feet off the bottom and 2 feet plus or minus that, so it should be anywhere between 2 and 6 feet off the bottom. But if you can see the figures there, it shows that the depth is 70 feet and we've only got 60 feet of line out, so that's over 10 feet off the bottom when you count for blowback. I'm not sure what's going on there. I have got a query in on the Canon help forum to see if anyone can tell me what that's about. In the meantime, we'll just have a play with it and see what happens. There's first slides up at Harry's. The first panel is from the Raymarine. We'll have a look at the same image on the Hummingbird next. As you can see, the side image is a bit distorted because it was a bit rough when I took this screenshot. So the side image is bouncing around a bit, but you can tell there's some structure there. The Raymarine picked up some bait in the water column, but I'm not seeing that on the Hummingbird image, although I think the Hummingbird image gives a slightly clearer shot of the structure on the bottom. Again up at Harry's, and this one's a really good piece of artificial reef. I don't think there's anything to pick from in the standard sonar image between the Raymarine and the Hummingbird. I haven't got the Raymarine on down imaging, but I really like that Hummingbird down imaging. That's super. Raymarine has a very good down imaging as well, but on the side imaging this time, I think the Raymarine's a winner. I really like that image. You've got to allow for the fact that the Raymarine has a higher resolution screen and a larger screen than the Hummingbird, so that does make a difference. There's no doubt the structure down there, you can see it well in both of the images, but I think the Raymarine's just slightly better in this case for the side imaging. Now this next one I find a little bit confusing. Looking at the image from the Raymarine, I would have called that for structure with some fish around it, but if you go over and look at the Hummingbird image, it's looking a lot more like a big school of fish. I'm not all that familiar with side imaging, I'm just learning it. I've had the side imaging for about a year now, or getting on that way. I did try to use it at first, but then I gave up on it because I just couldn't understand what was happening. I've got a bit of a handle on it now, but I'm still struggling to pick out the difference between structure and fish at the moment. As I said, on the Raymarine, I'd call that structure with some fish, but on the Hummingbird, it's looking more like fish. At the moment, I'm going to call it fish, but if anyone's got any tips on how to interpret these two images, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Now this next one's another strange one at Harry's. If you have a look at the side imaging, it looks like there's a tear in the bottom or a gully or something down there, but I'm pretty sure that's not what it is. Looking at the down imaging on the Hummingbird and the traditional sonar on both units, I think that's a school of fish. And the only thing I can interpret the side imaging as is a shadow thrown by a big school of bait fish, because there's not many big fish amongst them. Looks like there might be a couple of big fish in amongst them, but it's mostly bait, and I think that's probably why I'm not seeing any fish on the side imaging, but I am seeing their shadow on the ground. Could be totally wrong with that. As I say, I'm still learning side imaging. But to be honest, neither sounder on the side imaging is giving me much to go on to interpret what's happening on the bottom. In this shot, the Raymarine unit has picked up some fish in the water column, and it shows there's something on the bottom, although I can't tell for certain whether it's irregularities on the bottom or some fish sitting there. But if we go over to the Hummingbird image, we can definitely see the bottom a lot better. There's some irregularities on the bottom, but there's also a lot of fish shadows on the bottom. It hasn't picked up the ones in the water column quite as well, but you can see there are some there. I think the Raymarine settings need a little tweaking. This one's just a Raymarine shot. I didn't manage to get this on the Hummingbird. I'm not sure what that is off to the left of the boat. It looks like some small piece of structure on the bottom, but I'm fairly confident that the marks on the right hand side are 3 fish holding fairly close to the bottom. At least they look like fairly classic side imaging shots of fish on the bottom. Again, I'm not that experienced with the side imaging, and you really got to catch them to be sure, but they do look like fish to me. This is another image from the Raymarine without a Hummingbird to compare it against, but you can see there's some fish up in the water column. They came out clearly on the traditional sonar, and I think that's what's causing the shadows over on the left hand side of the side scan. Not certain, of course, but it seems likely because it just somehow doesn't look like structure on the bottom. I couldn't see any fish on the side scan while I was out there, but looking at it magnified on a computer screen with much higher resolution, I'm pretty sure I can. And once again from the Raymarine, I didn't know what I was looking at while I was out on the water, but getting it home here and putting it on a high resolution computer screen, blowing it up and looking at it in detail, I can see there's a lot of fish in this image. I guess picking them out on the smaller screen when you're on the water just comes with practice. I gave up on Harry's and I came over to the foul ground and got a couple of marks here. Water's smooth as, beautiful day out on the bay, but so far I haven't seen any real signs of fish on the sounder. I've seen a couple of smallish shows. So I'm just continuing to troll and play around with the downrigger, see if I can get that worked out properly. I think I'm getting there. I did come across a menu item that you could input the depth of the transducer, which I think was why it was tracking a lot shallower than it should, because the transducer was set deeper than it should have been. So I've adjusted that and just seeing how that goes now. Quite a few boats out on the bay today. Harry's was crowded, foul ground's getting crowded. A lot of boats were moving out of Harry's when I moved out. Magnificent day though. Worth being out here whether there's fish or not. This is yet another snap from the Raymarine. I didn't take one on the Hummingbird, but I took this one for no better reason than that the bottom showed a marked difference in composition over a fairly localised area. It may not amount to anything, but every time I go past that, I'm going to scan it again and just see what's around. You never know, things like that often attract some fish, even though there's none on the sounder at the moment. This image from the Raymarine shows a little drop-off at the north end of Green Island. It's only about 4 feet or so. I haven't fished Green Island for more years than I care to admit, but back in the day, that sort of structure I used to find would fish well on a particular tide. Might have been the run in or the run out, just depends which way the water's going. You've got to experiment with those sort of things. The other thing to note about this image is if you look in the traditional sonar, you'll see the downrigger ball tracking along and then dropping down to maintain its distance off the bottom. That looks pretty impressive. And this is another shot from the Raymarine of the same feature, just a little bit further along, and this time it looks more like a gully, only about 3 foot deep. Looks a lot wider in the side imaging than it does in the traditional sonar. I took this image on the Hummingbird and it's just off the reef on Green Island. I'm just coming up onto the reef. You can see that the brain coral and the reef structure is starting to get a bit thicker on the right hand side of the boat. I was heading south at the time on the east side of the island. You can also see it in the down image and the traditional sonar. The down image and the traditional sonar are also showing a lot of bait fish. There might be 1 or 2 bigger fish in amongst them just by looking at the traditional sonar. It's hard to tell when you get in shallow because all the fish look pretty big even if they're only bait fish. Anyway, I dropped the sabiki rig down here and there along Green Island and all I got was bait fish. I got quite a few in the live well. Didn't do any fishing but I ended up taking them home, freezing them up for next time or making burley out of them. In the down image you can see the bottom following downrigger is tracking from about 7 or 8 feet underwater to about 5 feet, maintaining a set distance off the bottom. And I had a diving lure on, which would have been running about 4 or 5 feet under that. So the lure itself would have passed through the middle of that ball of bait that was pretty much directly under the bait. Looking at it in the side image, you can see the bait school on both sides of the bait, so that lure went straight through the middle of it. Again, to my mind, proving that they're all too small to be really bothered with a 6-inch lure. Anyway, point with this image is, if you're looking for bait and you don't have any spots like around the beacons or that, you're looking in around the islands, get up in a shallow reef. Be really careful because you'll lose a lot of sabiki rigs if you let it get down as far as the reef bottom, because it'll just snag up. But if you can manage to keep your sabiki off the bottom, you'll pick up a lot of bait fish in these sort of schools. Just be a bit selective about what species you take for bait, because there's often a lot of small squire amongst them. Don't take any notice of the side imaging at the bottom of this. It's taken on the ray marine. The boat was turning at the time, so the side image is very distorted. What I do want you to notice is the reef in the traditional sonar. We're right on the edge of it where it comes along and then starts to drop down into deeper water. You can see a few fish up on the top of it. I think they're a little bit on the smallish side. Really hard to tell in the sonar, but from where they're sitting, I'd expect them to be relatively small. What you want to do in a place like this, where there's a reef, comes out fairly shallow, that's just about 12 feet of reef, and as it drops down into the deeper water, the reef will become more sparse. There'll be less coral. You'll get to a point where there's practically none. There's just a little bit around. Go there, or maybe even just a little bit further and spot lock, anchor, whatever. This is the sort of area that you want to fish on a slack tide. Just put a bait on the hook, no weight at all. Cast back towards the reef, but not too far over the reef, because you don't want your line sinking down into the heavy reef. You're wanting to target that drop off as the reef disappears. That's where the bigger fish are holding, looking for the bait that's holding over the reef. I've caught a lot of fish that way in these sort of reefs. It's been many, many years since I've fished Green Island, but I would expect you'll still catch them that way. The only thing is, I don't think you're going to catch much when there's a lot of boating activity, because it does scare them. Now, this one's taken on the ray marine and it's potentially interesting. I can see what looks like a fish up in the water column to the left of the boat in the side scan, and I can see its shadow down on the seafloor. I can see in the traditional sonar what looks like a school of bait down on the seafloor. That's about all I can tell from this. I'm just not dialed in well enough. However, if we look at the hummingbird image, I'm getting that one dialed in pretty good right now. I can see the bait down on the seafloor in the traditional sonar image, and I can see the seafloor has thickened up a little bit there, indicating a change of density in the seafloor, which could mean there's a little bit of structure there. If we look at the down imaging, I can see a couple of fish that are big enough to be picked up by the down imaging, and what looks like there might be a bit of structure there. Coming up to the side imaging, definitely that fish in the middle of the water column and his shadow there. There's shadows of some other fish holding closer to the bottom, and I can see the structure. We've just passed behind the boat. I can see it on either side, so we've gone right over top of it. It's either structure or a really densely packed fish. I think it's a bit of both though, because the thickening on the traditional sonar sort of indicates there's something there. So I think we've got a little bit of structure and some fish holding around it. Here's another image that just demonstrates how much work I've still got to do to tune the ray marine unit in, as well as I've got the hummingbird now. On this ray marine you can see there's something off to the left of the boat. Just can't tell what it is at all. I can see there's some bait fish under me in the traditional sonar view, but it's not till I have a look at the hummingbird views that I really get a good idea of what's happening. If you look in the traditional sonar and the down imaging, right on the left hand side of those, you'll see that there is some bait. It was nearly scrolled off the screen by the time I got to take this screenshot. But over on the left, you can see some structure on the bottom. It's a bit isolated, but it is there. I reckon I can see a couple of fish in amongst that structure too. Just looking at it now on the computer where I can blow it up nice and big to see it. Now this one was a bit strange. It was just a relatively small and isolated piece of structure, so I took a snapshot of it. Go back and have a look at that sometime. And that's about it for the ones that I wanted to speak of. There's some more coming up that are just schools of fish or little bits of structure. Obviously these schools of fish don't mean much because they move around, but I put them in just to show you what you can see down there. The settings I was playing with change from time to time, which is why some snapshots are better than others. Some of the ones aren't real good, some are not too bad. I wouldn't say there's any really good because I've seen some snapshots that are just brilliant, and these certainly aren't them. But I think I'm getting it dialed in so I can get a better idea of what's happening on the bottom. These sounders are much better and far more complex than anything I've used in the past, so it's taking a while to get a handle on them. Anyway, I hope you enjoy seeing what's down there and do a bit of sounding around yourself and see what you can find. I'm sure a lot of you do that anyway. So thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Until next time, good fishing.